this device. Okay. Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome back to the Just Worry podcast. I hope everybody is doing well out there. And today's a little bit of an interesting episode. It's me talking about my thoughts on political correctness, identity politics, and, the divisiveness going on in America between the left and the right and all that. But before I get into that, let me just say if you haven't subscribed, please hit the subscribe button on the podcast. And if you watch the YouTube videos, please subscribe to the channel. And if you haven't done so, follow me on Twitter, the Just Ray podcast. You should come right up. And before I get into the serious discussion and talk I'm gonna do, I want to say that I want to thank everyone that's been listening to the podcast, and I seem to be getting more and more listeners, and I really appreciate that. It's really cool. I just passed the 1,000 downloads mark a couple of days ago, and you guys are all totally responsible for that. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for standing in there and liking what I'm doing. I really appreciate it. And I am going to be taking a little bit of a break after this episode. It's probably going to be about a 3 to 5 week off period, something like that, around a month. I'm going to be using that time to do some upgrades on the show. I'm going to get a better mic so that I sound a little bit better. I'm going to get some better lighting. And more than anything, what I want to work on is making sure that the podcast comes out on a certain day every week. And I am shooting for 1 a week, which I think is doable. If it seems like that's going to be too much, it might end up being every other. But I'm going to shoot for 1 a week. And the whole point is, whether it's once a week or every 2 weeks, is to have it on the same day and the same time so that everybody out there knows when to tune in, when to expect a new episode. That's something I've been pretty spotty on up until now. And if you like the podcast, I want you to be able to recommend it to your friends and say, hey, this guy's doing something really cool and different. And you can check it out every Friday at whatever, for example. So I'm going to get that worked out, and I'm going to start booking guests ahead of time so that that lines up and you can expect new episodes at a certain time and a certain amount. So that'll be the biggest improvement overall, I think. But the other stuff will get better as well, and I'm hoping I'm still going to keep getting better and better guests. I've definitely been getting better people as time has gone on, and I think that's going to continue. And, while there will be the occasional episode like this one where I'm giving my oh so humble opinion on stuff, it's mostly going to be guests and interviews. That's what I want the show to mainly focus on. But every now and again, you'll probably get some either me and some friends, or just me kind of talking about what's on our mind, politically or culturally, personally, all kind of mixes. And see where that goes. You never know. But yeah, today I want to talk about. Uh, it's a tough one because I have always been a very progressive leftist leaning person, and I was raised in, as I mentioned, a very leftist community here in Santa Cruz by hippie parents that were very to the left and taught me from a very young age that uh, people's gender, sex, race, the way they look, the sexual orientation, whatever, has no bearing on what they are like as a person in and of itself. That everybody is different, yes, but that we have way more in common than we have, that separates us. And that's something I still believe to this day. I spent a lot of time as a kid. At first I got really into anti-war politics. I listened to the Beatles and John Lennon a lot. My parents played me a lot of Martin Luther King speeches. I still think to this day he's probably the most important person in history in terms of talking about not only how racism sucks, but even more importantly, how we're all the same and that the world should focus on love and peace and everybody being equal, whether you're black or white or any other race or any type of person, and that everybody deserves, love and respect, and everybody should have the ability to do what they want and have just as much ability to get ahead in the world, whether we're talking personally, socially, professionally, whatever. And I think Martin Luther King was one of the most eloquent speakers in history, in and of itself, just talking alone. But the way that he was able to describe the idea of a world where everybody was tolerant of one another and everybody had the same chances, and there was more focus on positivity and more to go away and be a thing of the past. These are all ideals that I was raised with and believe very strongly. And so I spent a lot of time as a kid going to anti-war marches and peace protests and, protests about spending money on healthcare instead of the military. And I'm still very uh, anti-war, pro-love and tolerance type of person. And I believe that all people should be treated equally and given the same chances. And whether, we're talking gender politics between men and women, or black and white with the races. I mean, whatever. Disabled people are still one of the most ignored and underrepresented groups out there. And that's partly why I'm doing this podcast, so that people get a sense of, a disabled person that doesn't really, I talk about being disabled when I have to and when it's relevant and when I'm trying to make a point about the way people treat the disabled. But in the long run, I don't want to be known as that disabled podcaster guy. But if I get big and famous from this podcast, that is what I will be known as to a certain extent, whether I like it or not. And that's okay. But obviously I want people to pay more attention to who I am and the things I say and my opinions rather than the fact that I'm disabled in and of itself. Okay. And I think that one of the biggest issues going on with politics today and progressive politics on the left in particular is this obsession and hang up on who we are, what our identity is. And especially if we consider ourselves to be a minority that is put down, whether it's women or African Americans or anybody that isn't white and male, pretty much. And obviously, there's some validity to that because white men have been in charge for a long time and they have taken advantage of that. And there's a lot of white rich men in particular that would like to keep things that way and stay in charge. And that fucking sucks. And I don't like that either. But when everybody gets totally hung up on who they are as far as whether they're black or they're white or they're a woman or they're male, I feel like especially the stuff around black and white or, dark skin. You don't have to just be black. Anybody that isn't white is historically been looked down on and taken advantage of, and women have been taken advantage of by men, and men have gotten way more rights and power than women historically. Uh, but the problem that I see kind of creeping up more and more, in my mind anyway, is that racism is a thing. Yes, sexism is a thing, and they both suck. However, anti-racism is a thing, or reverse racism, I should say. That's a better way of putting it. Reverse racism. And reverse sexism as well. Um, just because white men have taken advantage for years does not mean that, black people or Mexican people or whatever are not just as capable of being racist and intolerant as white people are. And I know that's not a very politically correct thing to say, but it's true. And women are just as capable of taking advantage of men and using their power that they have with, sex and all kinds of things that they use that men don't use the same way. I'm not saying all women do that. In fact, I don't think the majority do at all. But the problem is when we get into this mindset of, one group is the victim and the other group is the oppressor, and it's all very black and white. That's not the way the world actually works, and it's not the way people are, and we are all capable of being shitty and intolerant and taking advantage of others no matter who we are. And that's what I am seeing that bothers me and worries me is that when we get into these, like, whatever, when we're hung up more about what makes us separate than what makes us the same, then we start getting into trouble with shit. I have seen sort of this trend in media, in the press. And the thing is, it's not all of the left. There are a lot of, I've been hearing people, African Americans, women saying the same thing I'm saying right now. like speaking out against identity politics and talking about how, just because they happen to be African American doesn't mean that they see themselves as victims. And even though there obviously is still racism in America, obviously, particularly with like the cops and the way that the laws are dealt with and the way people are put in prison, it's been completely skewed and totally screwed up for years. Yep, there goes my phone. I forgot to turn it off. Anyway, um, even though that's obviously still a really big problem in America, that doesn't mean that things haven't gotten a lot better and that things are changing for the better. And it also doesn't mean that all white people are against black people and that every white person is a racist, or that every black person is a totally, together awesome person that doesn't take advantage of others or whatever. I believe that everybody is a human being, plain and simple. And it doesn't matter if you're a woman or African American or white or man or whatever. Like I said, we're all capable of being good. We're all capable of being bad. We tend to usually be in the gray area more than ever. Anything else, most people are all good or all bad. Some people tend to go one direction more than the other. Uh, but I don't like the idea of just saying because I'm white, I'm inherently racist or I'm inherently ignorant and that I'm like just causing a problem because of who I am. I think that's pretty fucked up, honestly. It's just as bad as saying black people are all a certain way or act a certain way or do certain things, because no group does anything all the time. That doesn't mean that I don't believe certain groups are different and tend to believe different things based on their cultural background and where they were raised. And, all of that matters and creates who you are and makes you the person that you are, same with men and women. And so, like, that there are women on the left and black, uh, podcasters and writers and politics that have been pointed out that this is kind of backwards thinking. And that if we really all want to come together as one, that we need to see each other as individuals and give each other the benefit of the doubt. When I meet someone for the first time, I always try to take it on face value, the type of person they are. I don't care what the skin color is or what the sexual orientation is or their gender is, whether I like them and whether I think they're a cool person or not has to do with the actions they choose to take and the things they say. And granted, I grew up in a fairly white, middle class area of California, but one of my best friends in high school was African American. He was a transplant from Compton, actually, and he was like a nerd, anime loving guy, super into weird stuff like I was. So we hit it off right off the bat, and I turned less when he was black. In fact, it just made it more interesting because it was this nerdy black kid from Compton that basically grew up in like a pretty tough neighborhood, and his parents wanted to get him out of there. And they didn't think that he had like a good chance at succeeding and doing well there. And they had enough money and ability to move to Santa Cruz. And I think it's cool that they did because I never would have met him and I never would have hung out with his parents that, grew up in LA as African African Americans and got their perspective and attitude on things. And my other best friend in high school, I had like 4 or 5 best friends, but one of my other main best friends was a Afghani American girl, and she was like amazing. One of my very best friends, and her parents were really a trip because they were very conservative Muslims. They wanted her to, date other Muslims, and they wanted her to be very, you know, conservative socially, and she was interested in alternative rock and roll. Jane's Addiction was like one of her favorite bands. I think she probably did psychedelics here and there, probably smoked some weed, and she was very open minded and very cool, and just one of my very closest and best friends in high school. I could talk to her about anything, and she was great. And, you know, her background just, again, made her life and our interaction that much more interesting to me. It was sort of like a spice that you add, if you will, to a mix. I mean, you gotta have stuff in common with people to a degree, and I think more than anything, um, at least my experience with the people that you connect with and become your best friends in life are the people that maybe you share some interests, and that certainly helps if you're into a lot of the same stuff, but it's more just kind of the way you interact and how easy you get along and how well you click, as it is, as they say, as it were, and just the easy going nature of the way you get along with the person. And I think that you can, get along with anybody and from any walk of life if you click with them and you find something about them you like. And I look at the way that the left and the right are getting more extreme in America, and the way the left is getting more and more hung up on political correctness and on, like, pointing out how white men are causing all the problems. And that's, important to a degree. That's a good place to start. But there's more to it than that. And, like, for example, there are some people in the African American community that think that white people should literally pay black people money for, the slavery shit that we did hundreds of years ago. And I have mixed feelings about that. I kind of get the idea behind it, and like I get the intention behind it. That kind of makes sense. But I never impressed anyone in my life intentionally, and I think intention does mean a lot. And you can't just like blame someone for what their ancestors did. I mean, there's ancestors all over the world that took advantage of people and did shitty things. And I don't think that paying them money is necessarily the way to solve the problem. I think we need to focus on, like, what causes racism to begin with, what causes people to hate people based on their color of their skin, what causes people to become attracted to, extremist groups and hate groups and things like that. And I think that has a lot more to do with poverty and an inability to get ahead in life, and we need to focus on, like, making sure that African Americans and every other minority group out there gets to get college educations and gets the same opportunities to get jobs as everybody else does, and women as well, and all that stuff. Like, that will solve way more problems, give people universal health care, like there are things that cause people to hate one another and fight one another, and it's when their resources are scarce or they're in an environment where they're surrounded by drugs and violence, and it's really hard to get out of those types of situations. And again, the prison system that's basically like the new form of slavery in America and has been for a long time. Like, these are the things that we need to solve rather than say, like, every taxpaying white person should pay African Americans $1,000 each or something. I mean, it's not going to solve anything in the long term at all. And there's a lot of African Americans that agree and think it's kind of going in the wrong direction. And like when you start focusing on how we're different instead of what makes us the same, it gets problematic. Like, what if, at a certain degree, like, what if people on the left started saying that white people should all get whipped in the streets because we, like, did that to black people hundreds of years ago. Like, I know that's sort of an extreme, crazy idea. That's probably not going to happen, but fuck, man, who knows? Like, you never know the way things are going. And, like, that would be insane and dumb and not solve anything either. And would just focus on how we're all different. And I keep reading reports about how public schools and even private schools are getting swept up in this identity politics thing. And we're talking to kids at a really, really young age, like not 12, 13, but like 6, 7, about like what transgender means, whether you're racist or not, how you're oppressing others, like Jesus, let's let kids be kids. Let's let kids figure out for themselves what they believe. Let's let a kid decide for themselves if they're trans or if they are oppressors or if they're not. I mean, I never thought I was, and I don't think I was, honestly. And it would have been weird to have to like fill out like some test at 7 years old talking about like my white guilt and my white privilege and like I don't know. It's just like not healthy and not good in the long run. And it's just going to cause more division, in my opinion. And that doesn't mean that things don't need to get better. And we shouldn't be trying to solve things and like focus on the big problems. But like here's an example. I read an article the other day by a woman in the BBC Press, and she was a blind woman, I believe, and she was writing an article about how ableist language hurts disabled people. And it was all about how using phrases like turn a deaf ear to a problem puts down deaf people, and how calling people dumb or stupid puts down mentally retarded people. See, I'm not even supposed to use words as retarded anymore. But when I grew up, that was just a word for someone that had mental retardation. It didn't mean that you innately looked down on them. I mean, there's a difference between calling someone retarded and going, hey, you fucking retard, and like that is a really prime example to me of like how words are given a lot of power. And that's another big part of identity politics on the left is focusing on words and the power they have, and that you shouldn't say certain things and you shouldn't say certain phrases and all that. But like to me, this article about quote unquote evilist language was just like ridiculous and dumb. And like, no offense to the author, like, if you really believe that that's really what we should be focusing on, you obviously have all the right to say so and say what you think. But I also have the right to say I think it's kind of dumb and that we should be focusing on other things. Let's focus on how disabled people are often still ostracized from society, especially as kids, and are forced to go into special education when they shouldn't have to because they're not mentally disabled at all. They're only physically disabled, but they still spend a lot of their lives in special ed schools and hospitals and places like that. Let's talk about how disabled people aren't represented in the media, how there aren't enough disabled actors or characters, and how when there are disabled characters, they're usually played by able-bodied people. Let's talk about how disabled people are often dehumanized and misunderstood and seen as asexual, and that they, if you're physically disabled, you're probably mentally disabled as well, which is not the case 98% of the time. And like, those are making things more physically accessible, getting rid of stairs, making all public buildings and private buildings wheelchair accessible. Like, these are the things we should be focusing on. And getting all caught up on the way we talk about each other is just dumb. And it's just part of the thing is I think people are just way too sensitive too, and they need to like get over themselves. Like, I have this memory. It's kind of a funny anecdote when AOL was still a thing, and I found a disabled chat group, and I went in there, and the first thing I said was something along the lines of, "Hey, Gibbs, what's up?" Something very off color and silly. But I call myself a gimp and a triple the same way that African Americans have used the N word. I take the power out of it. I think that it's funny to like the word gimp and triple was just like stupid and silly. And so like I kind of use it from time to time as a joke. And like obviously, there's a difference between me using it and someone coming up to me and going, "Hey, you fucking triple, what the fuck are you doing? You should fucking go back to the hospital or something. You're fucking disgusting and gross." But I mean, that's never happened to me, and I don't think anybody would ever do that. People tend to discriminate against the disabled in ways, subtler ways, like when I go out in public, if I go to a restaurant or a store and I interact with a waiter or a clerk or something, they often have the habit of talking to my caregiver instead of me about me. Like they're scared to look me in the face and talk to me. That doesn't happen a lot. It happens less and less, but it still happens. And those are the kinds of things that hurt when you're different and you're not represented because you don't feel like a human being. And yeah, bad words and like being called bad words or whatever, like there's some sting to that, but it's not even close to the way people stare at you if you're disabled and make assumptions about you if you're disabled that you can't do this and you can't do that and you wouldn't do this and you wouldn't do that. Those are the things I care about. Those are the things I want to change. Giving disabled people the opportunity to get education and get jobs and get represented in the world and get out there and do whatever the fuck they want to do. Those are the things I want to see. And so, yeah, long story short, when I went in the chat room, you can probably see where this is going. I immediately got a bunch of shit from everybody in the chat room. They were like, "Oh my God, how could you use such a word like that? You obviously hate yourself, and you don't think you're not a good disabled person." And all the shit, I was just like, "Are you kidding me right now? Like, I bet I do way more cool shit than any of you people do. And you guys need to get a life and calm the hell down." And that was like 20 years ago, probably. It's 25 years ago. And that kind of thing has just gotten worse and worse. And now it's gotten to the point where you can't say things, you can't say offensive things, quote unquote, especially when you're talking about what the left, freedom fighters, social justice people say is offensive. And while I am to the left and while I believe in equality, I think that there's a price we're paying for this type of thinking. One of the biggest examples, I feel like, is that people can't make offensive bad jokes anymore. And like my favorite comedians, like the best stand-up comedians of all time, and I don't care if you're talking about Richard Pryor or Louis C.K. or Eddie Murphy or Dave Chappelle or Robin Williams or the best of the best. Well, of course, Bill Hicks, my all-time favorite stand-up comedian. One of the reasons that all these guys were so amazing and so important is because they stepped on people's comfort zones. They pushed people's boundaries. They said things that were not politically correct, or even before that was a term, what was acceptable dialogue or acceptable behavior or acceptable things to say and talk about. And it doesn't matter if you're on the left or the right, there's a big problem when you start worrying about what you can say and how you can say it. Then we start getting into censorship and we start getting into free speech and we start getting into more than anything. I think the problem is that, like, if I was a stand up comedian today, I feel like even if I was the funniest, awesomest stand-up comedian of all time, I would be so fucking petrified of like doing my act and pushing people's buttons and like saying things that people did not want to hear. And I think that it has affected stand-up comedy. I feel like people have been, like Dave Chappelle's gotten a lot of shit. Louis C.K.'s gotten a lot of shit. Obviously, Louis C.K. got a lot of shit for another reason, which I'm going to get into in a minute. Yes, I'm going to talk about the Me Too movement a bit. But before I get to that, I just want to say that, like, right now, the people on the left are the ones policing everybody and saying what's right, what's wrong. But, we could just as easily live in a society where the right wing gets to decide those things and gets to say what's okay and what's not okay. And I think it's dangerous for any group to have that much power and that much influence over society and people's ability to speak out for what they believe. I know a lot of people that are very smart and very progressive. They don't have a racist bone in their body, a sexist bone in their body, but they're scared to like question any of this stuff because you get so much shit. And not only do you get social groups giving you shit and protesting you and calling you out if you don't say the like lock, stock, and barrel line and what's acceptable on the left at the time. But now you can actually lose your job over it. I want to point out this whole situation with this actress, Gina Carano. Now, she is an actor on The Mandalorian, which is an amazing, amazing TV show, the first high budget live action Star Wars universe television show. And it's fucking incredible. It's one of the best shows in the last, 10 years, probably ever. I mean, I'm a huge Star Wars nerd, so of course that has a lot to do with it, but it's also written and directed by John Favreau, who's fucking great with the Avengers and the Lion King and the Jungle Book and Switters and all kinds of great shit. He's been making great things for years. And he runs the show with Dave Filoni, the guy that does the Star Wars Clone Wars cartoon series, and they love Star Wars, and it shows. And anyway, Gina Carano was a UFC champion, martial artist, badass chick, got into acting, and she also happens to be rather conservative and has some issues with the left. And, you know, it's America. I may not be as conservative or have the same political beliefs that she has, but I firmly believe 100% that she should be allowed to think and believe anything she wants and not be punished for it. And she literally lost her job as a pretty big character on The Mandalorian because Disney had problems with some of the things she said on social media. And she didn't even do anything that bad. I mean, in my opinion, it wasn't that bad. She made some kind of like generic dumb statements about how the left is getting as fascist as the Nazis were during World War II. And granted, that's kind of an extreme simplistic thing to say, but it's not completely wrong, and she's certainly entitled to her opinion. And the other thing she made that really pissed people off was on Instagram or something where it said what your gender is. She wrote in beat bop bloop, which was kind of a, did a satire at trans people, gay people, and like whatever. It was also she was trying to be funny and make like a Star Wars joke too by making a sound that R2D2 makes, right? Beep bop bloop. And obviously it's dumb. It's low hanging fruit and an easy joke and whatever. But just as it's a bad joke in your opinion, or it's not tasteful in your opinion, so fucking what? Like, people should be allowed to make bad jokes. And I think that she definitely should have lost an amazing high profile gig in one of the best shows on TV over it, just for having opinions that don't necessarily mesh with the left or Disney. And it's, yes, I think there's something to be said for, companies being irresponsible and taking a political role in things, but firing someone just because they have different opinions than the left has, that's really messed up. And now she's going to have a really hard time getting a job in Hollywood, and I don't think it's fair at all, frankly. And I would defend her right to keep acting in mainstream productions, no matter what the hell she thinks. I mean, unless she's like out there, saying hate speech and saying that, black people or trans people suck or something like that. But that's a far cry from making a bad joke. And I think disabled jokes are funny. I think that even in bad taste, often when you're in like the worst taste, I think they're the funniest. Because I'm 12 years old and I have a very stupid silly, base sense of humor sometimes. And I think that's good. I think that's made me more tough. And like I can put up with a lot of shit. And I don't get offended by almost anything ever. And that's something I see a lot of now is just people looking for things to get offended about and, point something out about. And yeah. Anyway, that's an extreme example. And, it hasn't been that, there haven't been that many examples of it going that bad, but like it started with, the Me Too movement and people getting called out for obviously really horrible things that they should be getting called out for. And don't get me wrong, this is going to be a touchy subject, so I'm going to tread carefully here. But obviously, the Me Too movement needed to happen. Obviously, women have been putting up with sexual abuse in the workplace from like minor everyday stuff to, stuff as bad as rape and sexual assault. And, it's horrible and it's been happening for years. And it's a good thing that it's changing and people are getting called out on it that deserve to get called out on it. But I want to take like a few examples over the last 5 years to kind of illustrate a point I want to make about how did the left see it all as one big punishable thing that's all the same. And how it doesn't matter if you're doing something minor or you're doing something terrible, then it's all terrible and it should all get called out. I think there's some problems with that. Okay. So first off, obviously it would take something like someone like Harvey Weinstein or Kevin Spacey. Both very talented people, both people that did amazing work in Hollywood for years. I mean, without a doubt, the Weinstein brothers were the company that made all of the movies I fucking loved when I was growing up and going to high school. Everything by Tarantino, everything by Kevin Smith, everything by Robert Rodriguez. Like, those were my main three favorite directors back then. And they were all champions of Harvey and Bob. And those guys obviously had good taste and wanted to push movies that had a different vibe and a different narrative and all of that. And no one's really talking about the good that, Harvey did, which is understandable because he did some fucking horrible, heinous shit. And it's a good thing that he went to jail because of it. He totally should have. And shit like that should not ever be okay. But when we totally just brush aside the art of the artist, we miss a lot of, no one is perfect. Most people have done some fucked up shit, somewhat, here and there. Come on, Dad, shut up. And, like this whole thing of like pointing out everybody's issues, like Martin Luther King cheated on his wife, Lincoln was a racist, and now those guys are being questioned, even though they changed a little improvement better in a lot of ways. Obviously, Harvey did not do anything on that level, even if he made and produced some of the best films in history, But he did do some pretty amazing artistic things, and I think we should recognize that aspect of his life. Um, then you have like, okay, so there were, I mentioned Louis C.K. earlier. Now, he did some pretty TV shit. He had this whole thing about like jerking off in front of women whether they asked for it or wanted it to or not. And in fact, it seemed like when they didn't ask for it or didn't want them to do it, that was part of it that like actually turned them on the most. And obviously, that is really problematic and not very cool. And he should be called out for it. And the thing is, though, is that like all of this stuff used to get dealt with in the courts and with laws. And now it's like being dealt with by firing people from their artistic professions and taking away their power and their connections in Hollywood. And I understand why it went that direction because it's really hard for women to speak up about things like that. They're often not believed, and they have to deal with really sleazy defense attorneys that are always trying to make them look like sluts and, like you shouldn't pay attention to them for one reason or another because they got drunk in college or something like that. And that's obviously totally unfair and not cool. So I get why the legal system has not been as much of a focus. But problem is that we are all supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. And with all of these things, we really don't know what happened unless we were there, right? I mean, we hear what happened. And I'm not saying that with a lot of these guys, when tons of women come out saying the same thing, I don't believe the women because I typically do in situations like that. It's just important to keep in mind that you should look into it and find out what actually happened and have some actual proof, before someone loses their job or their professional future. So, what Louis was doing was not as bad as Harvey, in my opinion, but it was still pretty fucking bad and pretty creepy. Problem for me is that he was one of the most important comedians in history in terms of pushing the line of what's acceptable and pushing like people's taboos about racist thinking or non-racist thinking. And just he called everybody out. It didn't matter who you were. He had a way of like pointed out the insane ridiculousness in humanity in a way that made people uncomfortable and made them question themselves and made them question society and morals and taboos. And I think that is an invaluable thing. And he did something that was pretty priceless that very few comedians have been able to do on the level that he did it. And he, at the time that he got in trouble for that stuff, he was written and directed and starred in his own show on FX, Simply Totally, and it was amazing. It was one of the best shows on TV, like, period. And it was amazing partly because of what amazing tool he was. Like, he did things on that show with the directing and the concepts that was so experimental and so ahead of their time and so genius. And it's just complicated, is what I'm getting at, because the show disappeared. FX basically said it was done and they weren't going to have anything to do with him ever again. He started doing stand up comedy a little bit again in the last year, but he had to stay off the grid for about 5 years now, something like that, truthfully. And I just think it's important to separate the artist from the art to a degree. I get why people don't want to, but some of the best art in history has been done by very fucked up people. I mean, I still love Michael Jackson. I still think that what he brought to pop music and dancing is, one of the most incredible things that will ever be touched, probably never be touched in the history of pop music. And, it sucks if he was a pedophile. I don't know if he was or not. I wasn't there, but if he was, that's really horrible. And I hate that he victimized anyone. And if he did, then the families connected to those kids had to deal with that. It must have been fucking horrible, but I'm still gonna, like, respect his music. I mean, you know, people destroyed themselves and we still give their own a chance. Destroying yourself isn't that great either, but there's a lot of drug addicts in art and music and all that, and we forgive that a lot more, But anyway, I'm sort of going by the degree here because I think it's all different situation to situation. And I think that's part of the problem is that each situation isn't taken into account as much as it should be. And so another example, lately, Joss Whedon, the creator of Buffy, and is the writer and director of the Avengers, Age of Ultron. One of my favorite writers and directors of all time, a guy that changed the landscape of television as we know it, and also wrote some of the best and first female-centered horror, science fiction, fantasy centered shows and written. You can't argue with the fact that he broke the rules when it came to protagonists being female in the sci-fi horror fantasy genre. That was what he focused on a lot in all his shows, and all of his characters, whether they were female or male, were amazing and totally fleshed out and very complex, as he did tend to focus on female protagonists more than not, but not always. And you can't argue that he did some amazing things for the deep sci-fi genre in terms of women and the way women are portrayed and written. And I will defend what he did in that sense till my dying day. He's amazing. Um, and lately he got called out first by Charisma Carpenter, the actress from Angel, and it was weird the way that it happened. She said that she was inspired to do it because of the way that Ray Fisher, the guy who played Cyborg in the Justice League movie, um, called out him, Whedon, and Jeff Jobs, and one of the other producers on the set of Justice League for being racist, basically. Problem is, there was a investigation into it by the studio. Granted, it was by the studio, so maybe take it with a grain of salt. But Ray Fisher, said all these guys treated him in a racist manner, but he didn't give any actual specifics. And he still has yet to, and it's just weird because, Jeff Johns has been one of the most important and amazing writers at DC for the last 20 years. The identity crisis, or not infinite crisis, and a lot of the big crossover events of the DC universe. If you're a comic book fan, you know this. You've read tons of shit by him, and she's written amazing things about like racism and sexism in the comics. And so it's hard for me to believe that he's an outright racist guy. I mean, maybe he is. I don't know. But again, if you're going to call them that, you should have some actual proof and evidence to back up your story. Anyway, so Charisma, she said because of them that she was inspired to write this blog tweet about how Joss Whedon basically shamed her into having her character written out of Angel because she got pregnant. And that he used to call her names like that and tried to basically get her not to get pregnant and told her that if she did, she was going to get fired or have her character written down in the show. Okay. Now, again, maybe he did this, maybe he didn't. I don't know. I wasn't there. It's obviously not that cool if he actually did do that. But, this was the 90s. And if you were a attractive, hot actress, especially not like a character actress or someone that was maybe a little more known for your looks than your acting ability, maybe producers would care about that kind of thing a whole lot more. You know what I'm saying? And I think that there's some validity to them caring about that and saying to you, like, hey, you don't have to get pregnant right now. You are like the lead on a show, and you should take that into account if you're going to, want to continue doing your job, I guess. And it sounds like he did some shitty things, whereas he went, at least according to her, and then went, made a couple meetings, whereas he brought her in and told her that, like, you better not get pregnant or you're going to lose your job. And I guess he ended up following through with that, and she never had the courage to say anything in public for years. But I mean, I might also argue that part of the reason she might have waited as long as she did to say something is because she knew that her career was basically built by him and that like talking shit about him might not be the best idea if you're trying to get parts. And I get that like that's kind of fucked up, but at the same time, I don't know, it's complicated. And the thing that's been bugging me about that one is that after it happened on one second, let me just swallow it. Sorry about that. Anyway, as soon as she said that in the press, a bunch of articles started talking about it, of course, and all the other actresses and some of the actors even from Buffy came out in support of her, and not just in support of her, but like saying that, what Joss did was really fucked up. And then the actress Michelle Trachtenberg, who played Buffy's younger sister on Buffy, came out and made this wild, rude comment about how when she was on the show as a teenager, how Joss was, quote unquote, never allowed to be in the same room with her when no one else was there. Basically implying that he was a pedophile and was like hitting on her or something. Now, she hasn't said anything else. She hasn't given any context or any actual evidence about any of it. And luckily, no one else has been like, yeah, she was right. But that's a pretty gnarly thing to say about a guy, especially in today's climate. And like, yeah, obviously, if he's doing creepy stuff, that's fucked up. But this is all hearsay, and she didn't say anything else. And in fact, she's like, I'm just going to say that and not say anything else. And she even made a point to say that, which was like, don't ask me about it. I'm not going to like back it up. But yeah, I said it. And so now, every article that talks about Joss or he's just had a new show coming out on HBO called The Nevers, and they've been promoting it without even mentioning his name now, which is something that would have never happened before all this stuff came out in the press. And that was like a pariah. And I don't know where it's going to go, but he has yet to give his side on any of it. And there are all these articles talking about like how his legacy as a feminist writer is now called into question. And I think that that is kind of lame, honestly. And I feel like his art still made amazing changes for women in a really big way. And I don't think he should be completely dropped off the planet in the entertainment industry, even if he actually did what Charisma Carpenter said he did. Even I feel like, it's complicated. Maybe he should like apologize and say he's not gonna do that in the future. And if he does it again, people should definitely call him out on it. But I feel like he should be given a chance. And that's the other thing is that everybody is human. We all make mistakes. We all are capable of learning from those mistakes and becoming better people. And if you are, canceled and lose your ability to maintain art, how can you become a better person and change? It's weird. And I feel like it really needs to be taken on a case by case basis. Because then you've got like Aziz Ansari that basically got in trouble because the girl he was on a date with didn't find him attractive and didn't want him to hit on her. So instead of like just telling him she's not interested, she basically told him the truth in the press. And that is really fucked up because I've even had a lot of female friends that have talking to me in confidence about how they think it's really fucked up that women will like tall a guy that they find attractive, but it's on them. They'll, like happy and giggly and talk about how hot he is. But if a guy that, isn't as good looking or maybe isn't as confident, so he's like kind of weird about the ways he approaches them, maybe he's kind of scared, like if they call him a creep and how messed up that is. And frankly, it is messed up because calling a guy a creep implies that they're doing something like shady and manipulative and underhanded and sexually deviant or something like that. And that's really fucked up mentality if he's just like trying with all of his courage to like say hi to a cute girl or something. I mean, I've been on that side of it, and obviously, if a guy is actually being creepy, that's one thing. But hot guys are just as capable of being creepy. And the problem with this whole thing is that if you equate Aziz Ansari with Harvey Weinstein or even Louis C.K., you're basically dismissing all of the really real accusations out there. And the guy's really doing the worst fucked up shit because then everybody on the right is gonna just go like, God, you guys are being a bunch of sensitive psychos, and it's all like insane, and it's all identity politics, and blah, 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 blah. And, one last thought, because I'm pretty much done here, is let's think about me. I'm disabled. I get discriminated against and looked down on in a lot of ways all the time. But I'm also a white male. Am I an oppressor or an oppressed person? Probably both. That's the way the world tends to go. It's usually not black and white. Looking at things all the same in black and white is dangerous. And I think people need to be a little less sensitive. They need to work on their end of shit and look at the way that they treat people a little bit more instead of jumping to point the finger at everybody else and try to just treat everybody around them as equals, no matter who they are or what they are. And hopefully, if everybody does that, I know it's simplistic and sounds kind of cheesy, but I believe it, that the world will get better. And looking for ways to come together and see what we have in common is definitely the most important thing. And, obviously, not all political correctness is bad. Going after shitty people is not always bad. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we need to be able to question everything. We need to be able to question something if it feels off to us, even if it's not the most popular thing of the time. Because your group that might be in power might not always be in power, and things can be a lot different if you're on the other side of the coin. And while I, think people that believe in QAnon and saying, I also get why a lot of people on the right think that the left is off its rocker and has lost the plot. And I kind of agree in some ways. So that's about it. I have said mainly what I want to say. I know it's not politically correct, everything I said today, but I'm okay with that. And I welcome any criticism and questioning of anything I said today. And that's what makes the world a good place. And that's what makes America a great place, is that we can speak out and question anything and everything. And I hope that's always the case. And I hope that things get a little bit more tolerant of, different opinions and bad jokes, and trying to fix things by forcing the issue is kind of dumb too. Like this trend of having, like with every superhero movie that's come out in the last few years, if it's about a woman, it has to be directed and written by a woman. If it's about a black superhero, it has to be written and directed by a black person. I think that's really dumb, honestly. I think white people should write about black people. I think black people should write about white people. I think men to direct women, whatever. It should be about whoever is best at the job, not what they look like or who they are. That's how I'm tying it into my entertainment stuff. So there you go. Just the way. Sign it out for today. I'll see you guys next week. Or actually, not next week. I'll see you in a month. All right. Hope you guys are doing well and staying safe and loving each other and having fun. Good night.